Okay, welcome back. We were talking about the brain areas that were impacted because of ACE, because of cortisol. And so I want to spend some time breaking that down a little bit more time. So we already talked a little bit about the hippocampus, and the hippocampus being smaller in people who've experienced a lot of ACEs and the reasons why. So if you're thinking about a student, a person who has a smaller hippocampus, and you're trying to teach them something, think about what are they going to remember that? Are they going to remember that as adeptly as somebody without as many ACEs? And the answer is probably no. So, what can you do to help with memory? So think about repetition. Think about things that you can do in teaching that are going to incorporate more. This is teaching 101, more senses. What is going to engage them emotionally? How are they going to connect with the topic? And I would say repetition. Folks with a lot of ACEs need more practice. Corpus callosum. Corpus callosum is executive function. That's that white matter between the two hemispheres. It helps the left and right brain communicate with each other. And so, think about executive functioning, ability to make decisions, integrate information on both sides of the brain. It's going to be harder to do. So again, these multi-sensory activities, if a person can get up and walk around while they learn, if they can draw something out, or be engaged in a way besides of just sitting or just merely being on a screen, these are going to make more impactful learning events. Cerebellar vermis, if you're a coach, if you're somebody that's teaching gym or physical education, I'm guilty of before I'd see a big kid, and like for instance, so I worked at Meadow Lake, and I expect them to be able to do a lot of things physically. Well, you should just try to be an athlete. Well, honestly, the traumatic experiences, we see these outliers, these athletes, professional athletes that come through difficult, experiences. The norm of this is a person who's been through a lot of adverse childhood events. They have less muscle tone. They have less coordination. The cerebellar vermis helps a person coordinate action. And so, this person can't dribble basketball. You just need to practice. They need something first. They're going to need something first, because they're just not going to be able to pick it up like that. And that's the cerebellar vermis is smaller. The amygdala helps us control emotion, helps us regulate arousal, fear, and aggression. So if somebody's walking around, they really quick to anger, what the hell are you looking at? There's a physiological reason. Cortisol shrinks these areas of the brain. Cortisol influences structural, architectural mapping of the brain. And so you're welcome to read through these slides. You're welcome to read through, fight versus flight areas, executive functioning areas, or disengaged. You should know this in yourself. When we go into flight versus fight mode, basically what happens to you, you feel your heart start to beat more rapidly. Maybe you get butterflies in your stomach. Maybe you clench your fist or clench your jaw. The energy starts to go away from our brain and out to our body. And that used to be a survival function for us throughout the eons of human existence. If we had a tiger or a bear chasing after us, we need the extra energy. We need the extra burst physically. Now, when we're primarily safe from environmental threat, in the classroom, this isn't, when fight versus flight happens, now we start saying things that are rude. Now we start saying things, I told you to sit down. I heard, at an elementary level, I heard a student's name being yelled outside of an elementary school, one of our kids that I used to work with, the youth and family, and just berated. You're the reason why we're out here right now. You're the reason why the whole class isn't going to have a recess. And so just railing this kid, using their name. I was 50 yards away, could hear it very loudly, or it's plain as if I was in the same room with them. And basically isolating this kid from the rest of the class, demonizing them for acting out. And this kid is one that had been through a lot of traumas, a very high ACE score. And it broke my heart. I actually talked to the administrator about that. That was that's a bad thing. And so if you lash out at you as a teacher or as a professional in the school, if you lash out at a student, remember that oxytocin thing. That oxytocin thing is going by. Cortisol is going up. Cortisol is going up in you. Cortisol is going up in the student as well. Immediately, adrenaline gets released. Immediately, there's things said that are or done that are completely, maybe untoward, and some things that times people regret what they do. But that's the thing that we want to regulate. If we can regulate that stress response, because that's when cortisol, first of all, it's an adrenaline release, and then it's cortisol. And cortisol helps us to, in the short run, it helps us try to regulate all that extra inflammation. Cortisol, if we're in a fight versus flight situation, if you have like an injury or something, like an arthritic shoulder or knee, what do they give you? They give a shot of cortisone, right? Because they're trying to decrease the inflammation. In the short run, that's good. But you can't take cortisone shots all the time. You can't take steroids all the time because it's bad for you. It's toxic for your body and your brain. And if you want to know, really, this is the most graphic example I can think of. If you want to know what cortisol feels like, if you've ever lost somebody that you're extremely close to, I remember I lost my father 10 years ago. And for a month, I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't read a paragraph. I'd read a sheet of paper, look at it, put it down, couldn't tell you what the hell is on that paper. I was basically walking around in a fog, in a daze. That horrible feeling that's on you, that's cortisol. I was awash. I was bathed in cortisol. And that's really controlled glandularly. I mean, your hypothalamus, which is responsible for this fight versus flight thing that goes on, your pituitary gland releases hormones, which cause your adrenal gland to kick in. Your adrenal gland, think adrenaline, right? The adrenaline rush. But also secondarily to adrenaline, cortisol is released into your system. Because, say you got hurt fighting the bear, you do need some help in a short run with the inflammation. But in the long run, if we live like this, it's very toxic to our system. Now, I had those 10 factors of ACE, but this is the biggest shortcoming of the ACE study that I see. It left some things out. Basic separation from a parent, death of a parent. It definitely had abuse, neglect, and endangerment in there, but it didn't take into consideration accidents, natural disasters, or anything else. Think about COVID. For instance, exactly where we're at right now with COVID. I mean, think about the isolation with these kids. I mean, this is a difficult circumstance we find ourselves in. Kids, some of our children took refuge going to school, took refuge having a meal every day, and now they could pick it up, but if you've got transportation issues, then that's precluded as well. So it's very difficult, adding stress and insult to injury, the COVID situation. Kids that are isolated, kids that don't have the social, interaction, kids that are just, at the mercy of their families. And I say that, that's where they're surviving. So the ingrained survival things that people have had over the past year have really become more ingrained. Some of these things that you said, well, that's dysfunctional. Well, yeah, it's dysfunctional in the school environment, but it helped them function on some level somewhere else. And that's why it's appearing with you. It's not about you. You're like, what's my class? It is about me. It's about them. It's about how you can navigate that situation with these really stressful, because you yourself have had to make each one of you have had to make tremendous sacrifices, dealt with tremendous, horribly stressful situations, trying to navigate whatever the heck this is that we've done over the past year. Um, and hopefully we come out on it, better on the other side. I mean, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult to establish a new homeostasis, a new balance. I think that it's important that we recognize this particular slide, because I'm going to come back to it. This is an image I want to leave you with before we kind of break this up. How do adolescents and people respond? All right. So when people go through a lot of stress, when people go through a lot of adverse experiences, we get this adrenaline, we get this cortisol. This is part of the stress response. Ideally, in an ideal situation, this is how you establish resilience. This is going to introduce our next topic. This is how you start to heal some of the damage from all the things that we've endured. This serotonin, oxytocin, endorphins, these chemicals in the brain and the body tend to induce calm. I'm going to talk about dopamine in a little bit, but not right now. Dopamine kind of leads to, it leads to levels of attachment. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, because a lot of times adolescents, when they go through something really stressful, and really adolescents in general, when they're growing up, start to become really attached to things. A lot of adolescents just socially, adolescent psychology tells us that they're going to look for three things. Adolescents are going to be working on their independence. Whether you're in 6th or whether you're in 12th grade, you're working on independence from your family, some sort of independence of your own identity. Secondly, they're working on intimacy, whether you like it or not. They're working on these relationships where maybe it's a close peer relationship, maybe it's a romantic relationship, but they're starting to work on intimacy in these relationships. So independence, and conversely and interrelated intimacy. And the bigger part of this that they're working on, because you are getting them at a very critical stage of their development, 6th grade through 12th grade, and that is their identity. And so the biggest part of the identity, I mean, this is one thing about the United States public school system, is in most years, they spend 40 hours a week with you, 40 hours a week with their peers, 40 hours a week outside of their family. A lot of their waking hours are spent with others outside of their family. And so they're working on their own identity, independent from their family, also in relationship to others socially. So if you're thinking about what am I dealing with from 6th to 12th grade, you're dealing with identity, the identity of that child, their independence, who they are independent of others, and also their intimate relationship, their intimacy, whether that be close friendship or a romantic relationship with others. Those three I's: identity, intimacy, independence. Ideally, they work on that identity first. And that's not something, if you're like me, it took a while for you to figure out who you are in this life. And some of us are still going through that. What is my identity? And so that is something that if we reach out, if we can somehow be a positive force, if we can somehow form a positive bond with a student, somehow on whatever level, if we can start to release that oxytocin and validate their identity, validate who they are, something about them, find something positive about them to start working on that identity, that it's worthwhile. This is where we mitigate cortisol. This is where we start to help people learn. This is where we start to see new neural connections. This is where we see kids that have been through crap start to heal. This is where you start to heal. The healing actually will begin with us. I'll be back with another slideshow, but it'll have to be a different day.